Hi, I'm Rachel Lancaster, and this is the Magnificent Midlife podcast. This is where we celebrate women in midlife and beyond. We challenge the status quo and bash those negative stereotypes about being an older woman. We're not over the hill at 40, 50, 60. We're just getting started, and the world needs us now more than ever. I'll be talking all things midlife, about issues that matter, and sharing fabulous stories of amazing women doing very cool stuff. Now's our time. Today I'm talking to Vicky Midwood, a health, nutrition and lifestyle coach who specialises in helping people with disordered eating or drinking. I know this is an issue for many women, especially as a coping mechanism in midlife, so I'm delighted to be tackling it here today. Welcome, Vicky.
Thank you for having me, Rachel. It's lovely to be here.
So let's kick off with a very simple question for you. What is disordered eating, and how is it different or the same as addiction?
So when we look at addiction, we tend to think of it as something that we have absolutely no control over whatsoever, and it takes over our every thought process from the minute we wake up till the minute that we go to bed. Now, when it comes to disordered eating, there's an element of that in there for a number of people, but often it pops into our heads when we are using food or alcohol to feed our emotions and not our bodies. And we start telling ourselves that we should or shouldn't be eating certain foods, and that then correlates to how we feel about our physical bodies. Whereas addiction doesn't necessarily do that. Addiction focuses mainly on just how we are feeling.
Okay. All right. I think I've got that. It's quite complicated, isn't it? It's quite a nuanced distinction.
It is. But when you think about an addiction, the kind of the definition, if you like, the dictionary definition of an addiction is an obsession or a compulsion to continue doing a habit, even if you know that it's detrimental. Now, we need to eat to live.
Yes.
So we are going to be eating foods, but what disordered eaters tend to do is have a warped relationship with what they will allow their bodies to eat. So whether that be restricting the amount of food from a calorie point of view, or the types of food. So for example, foods that they consider to be high fat or naughty or bad foods, and then allowing other foods into their diet that they deem to be safe, but only in restricted or certain amounts. So there becomes a lot of rules around when you can eat, what you can eat, how you eat, and that's where it's disordered. They don't have a normal, in inverted commas, relationship with food as just a means of fueling your body and enjoyment, and that's kind of where it ends for the majority of people who are not disordered eaters.
And what are the common signs of disordered eating?
Well, it goes right across the board. So when we look at disordered eating, we kind of split it into three main categories. And I'm sure people will be familiar with some of these. There's technically four, but we'll look at the main ones that people have probably heard of: anorexia nervosa. So that is where people are severely restricting what they eat because they believe that if they are smaller and slimmer, that they will have achieved an element of success and feel better in themselves in all areas. Then we've got bulimia, which is where people are being restrictive with their diets, but then end up binge eating. And as a consequence of that, then they decide that they have to punish themselves in some way or make up for that overindulgence, either through exercise or restrictive eating the following day, or in some people taking laxatives or throwing up what they've eaten. So that's probably the main two that people have heard of. Then you've got binge eating disorder, which it only actually got recognized as a disorder in and of itself in 2013. So fairly a recent classification. And binge eating disorder is when people actively know that they are overeating on certain foods, but they do it to fuel usually an emotion or to fill a hole within themselves. And they feel when they're doing it completely out of control. that's normally followed with a resolve to be better the next day and not repeat the pattern. And then lo and behold, it gets repeated again. So there's a big element of not being in control at all around food. The fourth category is other non-specific eating disorders. So it's called OSED, which really doesn't tell us a great deal. But what it refers to is people who have their kind of own specific issues around food and the rules that they have kind of ritualized. So there may be people, for example, who can't have any food touching other foods on their plate. There may be some people who chew food that they deem to be naughty or bad, but then spit it out. So they don't actually swallow. So that would come under the category of other non-specified eating disorders. But right across the board, what's common amongst all of them from a personality point of view are some main clear characteristics. And people pleasing is massive. Perfectionism and having high expectations of self and often others is also a very big one. And there's always an element of trauma from childhood. And when we're talking trauma, I'm not talking about necessarily massive traumas, but continuous small traumas throughout their lives that have maybe led them to believe that their size and their shape dictates their success or their worth. And that's across all of those different types of eating disorder, kind of regardless of which one seems to be the main one that people follow. And people can change. There's one other that women now, particularly as we get into that midlife and maybe have the time to take a little bit more notice of what we're giving ourselves and what we're making to eat, but also how we exercise and looking at maybe organic type of foods now, because perhaps we've got a little bit more money to spend, and what actually is classified as healthy food can go down the road of orthorexia. And you may have seen on the internet the terminology eat clean. And this is being, absolutely vigilant in that there's no pesticides, it's all organic, it's grown here, and you know the history of it, and you won't let anything inside your body that's not pure, for example. So that's yet another category that is becoming more and more prevalent.
So much, isn't that?
Yeah.
It's just listening to you, there's so much. I know from sort of personal experience of, not my own personal, but of seeing it in others, that there's that element of control is massive, isn't it? When everything else is kind of out of control, yeah. This is the bit that I can control.
Absolutely huge. Yeah. And that is where people struggle so much with particularly binge eating disorder and emotional eating disorder, because they feel that there's something wrong with them, that they are losing control. And the longer it goes on, and the more frequently people binge, the more they feel out of control. And that then feeds the cycle, because the more out of control you feel, the more anxious you feel, the more stressed you feel. Then we've got that hormonal effect that kicks in. And when you're stressed and anxious, by default, we're going to go for the foods that we tend to go for when we binge eat. And that's not going to be broccoli and chicken. It's going to be things like bread and cakes and ice cream and chocolate and biscuit and all of those things that we know make us feel better. And I think it's so complicated for people because these foods actually do make you feel better, and they do. And nobody listening who is recognizing themselves in anything that we've talked about is stupid. We wouldn't keep doing this if it didn't give us something. We wouldn't keep doing it if it worked. And it does work, but it's temporary. And the biggest problem then is how we feel about ourselves afterwards. And usually what happens when we feel we've lost control is that we vow that next time I'll have more control. And often what we do is set ourselves even more stringent rules and make it even harder then to feel in control when we do go out of control, which is then inevitable.
And I'm guessing COVID has just made it all an awful lot worse because we have no control over anything at all much anymore, do we?
No. And for particularly, I think the younger children, the teenagers and the young adults, that's huge. And I know as midlife women, my daughter's 23, I speak to a lot of people who have children who have gone through maybe their A levels, but then are they going to get to university? Are they not? Some haven't actually taken their A levels, and so they're getting predictive grades. And there's this uncertainty, and a lot of them are managing that by restricting their food or exercising excessively. And for a midlife parent, mums and dads, to see this happening and feel helpless yourself because you can't answer their unknowns means that you're all kind of in this environment where nobody quite knows what is the right thing to do or the best thing to do, and it can become a complete minefield that can cause a lot of family strife and anguish for everybody involved.
It's a melting pot, isn't it? No, a perfect storm rather than a melting pot. It seems like this big melee of trying to manage emotions and not being able to. And I want to talk about your personal background, but I know that alcohol is also very closely linked, because when you've got some sort of addictive behavior, then you're or an addictive personality, then alcohol is there as well in the mix, isn't it? So
often, not always. I think if you're very much somebody who goes down the road of the anorexia route, then calories are kind of king, and you're not going to waste any calories on alcohol at all, because that's just, we all know alcohol is pretty calorific, and it's very easy. It doesn't fill you up like food does. And when it comes to alcohol, what a lot of people who binge eat find is that when they drink, that can lead to a binge, because they are more relaxed and they've taken the foot off the gas, if you like, of the feeling of being in control and the rules. So drinking can often lead to making the eating worse. Not always, but it can. And often it's a case of, which one is the one to tackle first. If you've got those two things happening at once, then I would definitely say you need to look at the alcohol side of things in conjunction with the food initially. And if you feel, and this is where working with somebody who knows what sort of questions to ask, but if you feel that putting down alcohol completely is the best way to go to help you to deal with the food, then that's definitely something to think about. That doesn't mean you have to put it down forever, but trying to tackle them in conjunction is extremely challenging. But yes, they often do go together. For me, they definitely did.
Well, yeah, perhaps you can tell us a little bit about your background, because I know what you do now and the passion that you have for this topic very much comes out of your personal experience, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think the most important thing to know is that I kind of been through a number of those, and I think the best way to think about disordered eating is if you do get a diagnosis or you want to label yourself, just be a little bit wary, because it can change over time. It's ultimately not about whether you've got bulimia or anorexia or binge eating disorder. It's ultimately about how do you relate to food and your body, and what are the feelings and thoughts around you giving yourself permission to nourish yourself. That's kind of the bottom line. Now, I did not understand that. I thought it was all about size and calories, and I very much bought into the idea that to be successful and to be attractive, you needed to look a certain way as a female. And that meant that you needed to be slim, and you needed to have a good dress sense, and you needed to be popular, and all of those kind of things. And when I was a little kid, I was a chubby child. So when I talk about the small trauma, there was a lot of that going on in my life. There was no huge, massive events. Well, there was later on, but initially when I was little, there wasn't. But I didn't realize then that my insecurities and my behavior, even when I was a child, were focused around making myself feel better with food. So I was one of those kids who would pinch your chocolate if I could get away with it, because I wanted it, because I saw it, right? And I didn't know anything more than that. But it's like I didn't have an off button when it came to certain foods, even, around the age of 5 and 6. As I started to get into those teenage years and be more aware of my body, I couldn't kind of pass off that, it's puppy fat, because that was the saying back then. And I got mixed messages around food, because it was, you don't want to be fat because you're not attractive. And you get comments like, oh, she's a well-built girl, isn't she? Oh, hasn't she got a good appetite? On the one hand, but then you'd be praised for clearing your plate so that you could have pudding. So eat a lot of food so I can give you more food. When you think about that message now, it's kind of no wonder there was this complete dissonance between how I felt about food and how I felt about how I looked. And you don't connect them when you're a kid in the same way. But when I first started on a diet with all my friends at school, as everybody does, they started on the F-Plan diet, so did I, and it was calorie counting and it was eating fibrous foods. Some of your listeners may remember it. It was kind of all the rage. It was everywhere. They could stick to it and I couldn't. And I didn't know why. I was getting obsessed with weighing every single thing and what time I could eat. There was no connection to hunger. It was what was I allowed, what wasn't I allowed. So even then, on that very first diet, there was something that wasn't working and wasn't right for me. And I very quickly discovered that if I wanted to eat the foods that I liked, but I didn't want to put on weight and I still wanted to lose weight like my friends were, I had to find a way around it. And that was to stick my fingers down my throat and make myself sick after eating. Not a pleasant experience to start with, but it's a bit like anybody who takes up smoking. You kind of persevere even if it's not very nice, right? And eventually I got very good at it and I started to get the results that I wanted, to the extent that I was skipping breakfast, I was skipping lunch at school, I was lying and manipulating, pretending I'd eaten. I'd come home, I'd eat dinner in the evening, and then I would disappear and I would go outside and get rid of it somewhere else so the family didn't know. And that went on through my teen years, when I took my O-levels, and I was getting slimmer and smaller until eventually, when I got to do my A-levels, I had a serious problem. I'd went for therapy, and when I look back now, it wasn't helpful in the slightest, but it was very, very new. I'm talking 30 odd years ago. And it was the very first person who was a bulimia specialist in Leeds. And all I can remember was saying what I believed they wanted me to say in our sessions, because that manipulation and people pleasing was rife, and being sat in a room and told that I couldn't leave until I'd eaten a sandwich. Now I understand about how we can help people. That is really not the way to do it at all. So that really didn't help me in the slightest. But what I discovered was that around about 13, we started to go into the town centre, the local town centre. And I was quite tall for my age. And I was quite well known. And my family, it's a small town in the north I came from, and my family had a business. So they were quite well known. And people knew who I was. So I would be allowed into nightclubs or bars because, it's so-and-so's daughter. And so, of course, I'd bring my friends with me with the proviso that we weren't going to drink. Well, of course we were. And I could get served at the bar. And so I discovered that 3 glasses of wine made me feel good. For the first time, I wasn't absolutely focused on my body and how I looked to other people. I was able to just chill out and relax. And I was actually quite funny and quite chatty and not really serious. So I liked it. And that was at 13. Now, I didn't become a regular drinker then. But when I did go out, I wanted to hit that sweet spot. I never got crazy drunk. But I understood that it changed how I felt. And as I got into my teens and into my kind of really bad phase, what I call my bad phase of being addicted to laxatives and what have you, and pretty much not being able to keep down anything that I ate, I was threatened with hospitalization from my dad not from a GP, but from my dad, because he knew people who would probably make me go in, and I didn't doubt that he did. And fortunately for me, I was still so stubborn in myself and in my personality that no one was going to force me to eat. If I was going to have to eat, then I had to do it myself. But what I did get was a realization before that. And I'm so grateful. Call it the power of the universe, whatever you call it God. I'm not especially a religious person, but I do believe there is something bigger than me that's looking after me. And, technically I shouldn't be here. The amount of things that I've gone through, but I am. And that was one of those. And I had a realization and a scare. I woke up one morning, I was about 5.5 stone, and I woke up, I had a glass of water, and it literally came straight back up. I couldn't keep it down. And I tried a second one, and the same thing happened. And that absolute fear that somehow I'd broken my body and couldn't keep anything down was powerful enough for me to take a proper look at myself and go, you know what, this isn't working. And if anybody's listening who has been through this, they'll understand that your head tells you the thinner you get, the more attractive you'll be, the happier you'll feel. And it doesn't work, because the thinner I was, the thinner I wanted to be. I still didn't feel happier, still didn't feel attractive, because it's all about how you feel in your head about yourself. And it's not about the looks. But at that age, 17, I couldn't get my head around that. So when I chose that I was going to eat, I then didn't know how to eat like a normal person. And so my body started to put on weight. And so I went right the other way into binge eating disorder. So from being somebody who was not eating much and throwing up, I went completely the other way. I didn't know what a portion was. I was still out of kilter with my hunger and full up signs, but there was a part of me that wanted to punish myself for allowing myself to put on weight. And to deal with that, that's when the alcohol came in. And it came in big time. So not only was I eating more, I was drinking more. And so I went from 5.5 stone to the heaviest I've ever been in my life, in a very short space of time. Now that, I didn't know it then, but that created so many problems internally for my gut function, for my liver, for my pancreas, for my hormone balance, and all of that. And the upshot is that it's because of all of that behavior that I ended up having a heart attack in 2018. And I have something called Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is a problem with my thyroid due to leaky gut. And I have leaky gut because of my alcohol addiction and because of the damage that I did with addiction to laxatives, and just not allowing my body at any time to allowing that gut to actually heal. So, would it have made a difference, honestly, back then, even if I'd have known? I don't think it would. But at least I understand now the consequences on a physiological standpoint, just what the damage it can do, and why it's so important to catch it as early as possible to minimize the effects that just might happen, in my case, decades later. And then, of course, I didn't know how to lose the weight. So I went back to the bulimia because I knew that, and off the cycle went again. But alcohol by that point had pretty much taken over. And I had those two things running for a long time. I made some crazy life decisions throughout that process. Of course, it affects your thinking. It affects everything. When I did put down the alcohol, eventually, I just thought, well, that's it now. I've got a second chance at life. Went on to do addiction psychology, because once I understood the addiction process, my brain was like, well, why didn't I know about this? Why doesn't everybody know about this? Because it's not that complicated. And I started to learn about CBT and NLP, so cognitive behavioral therapy, neuro-linguistic programming. I was an exercise and fitness instructor. When I left at my A-levels, I did terribly, not surprising, with all of the food issues going on. I didn't know what I wanted to be. And I happened upon some fitness classes and decided that I could be a fitness instructor. So I went and qualified in London, walked straight into a job. And so that's kind of what I started out as. when I went through rehab in 2005, I decided that I didn't even know if I wanted to continue in that world, because obviously it's a lot of visual and pressure on how a fitness instructor is meant to look. But I knew that I could teach people to do what I did. So I actually graduated. I hadn't done university, so I went back, I graduated and all of that. And then I was building my business. I was on my own with my daughter, and I was building my business. I was studying, and suddenly food became a thing again. And I realized that I still hadn't quite tackled the emotional side of using food to cope with emotions and stress and all of that good stuff. And that's when I really decided to find out what was the missing piece that I hadn't quite got yet. Unfortunately for me, people came into my life who had that information. So I went on to understand about, vagal tone and the gut-brain connection and neurobiophysiology. And that's when I kind of went, okay, now I get it. And now I understand how I can help people. Hence, I went on to do my functional nutritional therapy and functional medicine training. So I'm a bit of a geek when it comes to genes and cellular stuff, but also nerves and emotions. And the biggest thing for me is realizing that there are so many people, not just women, but people who are struggling with food and alcohol. And yet they are the two things that as a society we are using legitimately to make ourselves feel better in one way or another all of the time, whether it's to celebrate, whether it's to commiserate, and to admit that I have a problem with it has still got so much stigma. And yet when we start talking about it, like one-to-one, or if a group of 3 women get together, you suddenly realize that pretty much all of you are feeling similar or have felt it. I'm not saying every woman has an issue with food and body image and shape, but there's a lot who do, probably more than we realize. And my aim over and above anything and everything is to get us being more open about our feelings around food and helping people to understand that actually this stuff is not about willpower and going on diets. If your relationship with your body and if you're looking at your shape and size as being a barometer of your success and your happiness, that's what needs to be addressed first.
Wow. I'm just like, I've read about your story, so I knew some of that. Yeah. But my goodness me, you're so brave to share all of that. I really do. Hats off to you. I think it is phenomenally brave, and it's very inspiring because, as you say, there is so much shame around it, and we don't like talking about it. And it's like menopause, we don't like talking about that, and food and how we look and alcohol, it's all mixed up in that, and midlife and menopause can make it worse.
Yep,
because the hormonal stuff is going on and that's getting in the way. How we feel about our bodies, even for the women who perhaps didn't have an issue when they were younger, they start putting on fat around their belly.
Yep.
And then that becomes an issue in midlife. And how do we start controlling that? I'll just share though, I remember when we were preparing for this, and I told you that I never actually had that pressure growing up. I'm the child of 2 rather rotund parents. I'm all right. My mom doesn't listen to the podcast, so I think I can get away with it. She's not now. She's probably the slimmest now, not quite the slimmest she's ever been.
Right.
Because she went on a long trip and she came back and she'd lost like stones. She was, really slim. But my father was huge. My father was a big man, and he carried so much weight, and I believe it ended up killing him. Because it made him so immobile, and he didn't bother to look after himself, and I've talked about that on the podcast. But as I was growing up, the girls at school. I remember once. Yeah, I was in a show at school. Yeah, that was it. I was in a musical show, and all the other girls seemed to be so much slimmer than I was,
Right.
and we had to wear these short skirts. I think it was cabaret, and I was the lead because I had the best singing voice,
Wow.
but I didn't have the best body. And I remember standing backstage once, and so one of the lads in the performance, he said, "Oh yeah, you've got hockey players' thighs," and I thought, "Oh no, I've got hockey players' thighs." And you know what I did after that? I used to go and run at lunchtime because I'd got hockey players' thighs, and that one person. But before that, I kind of dealt with it. I might have aspired to be like the other girls, but my family wasn't like that, and there was no pressure. I could eat whatever I liked. I mean, you know, we used to have chocolate biscuits and crisps for tea every day. You know, it was not very good, really. Sorry, Mum. It wasn't really.
Did she not know?
Sandwiches and crisps and chocolate. You know, that's what I used to have for my tea.
And I think this is the thing that you just touched on, something so important there, that even if you normally felt fine, it took something like that show for you to start to compare yourself to others. And then that one flippant comment
Yes.
was the thing that suddenly changed your behavior and changed your focus. And that's how quickly it can affect us. And especially, you know, when we're younger, we're seeing, I mean, the younger people are seeing this all over the place on sort of Instagram and Facebook and stuff. So to some extent, I guess they're used to it. But in an environment like that, where you weren't exposed to how everybody else looked, you only got the environment of people that you know, it somehow seems like, oh my God, I have to change it. I have to do something about it. And interestingly, that you went straight to running.
Because it was the only thing I knew what to do, really.
Right. And this is where, so we get this information, and then what do we do with it? Well, we don't know. So we do something that we think is the right thing to do.
Might reduce the circumference of my thighs.
But actually, potentially wasn't going to be beneficial to you. And I think this is why we've got to bring this stuff out into the open so much more, because we've got so many people now who are having issues with menopause and digestive symptoms and autoimmune issues and so forth, right? And there's so much being offered to them along the lines of do a detox, go on a diet, change this. But what people are not getting the message through loud and clear is that detox plan that person devised worked for that person and that person's body, and they are not you with your stresses and your genetics and your lifestyle issues and your habits. And so when their plan doesn't work for your body, that's when you make yourself feel even worse because you think you failed, and then you go on to the next thing. And what we suddenly lose then is the connection to ourselves. And as midlife women, let's face it, we weren't probably great at putting ourselves first and connecting to our wants and needs anyway, because partner, business, home, children, parents, they kind of all come above. And if you've got pets, maybe them as well. Yeah, and then you come down here somewhere. So often you're eating, grabbing on the run and not taking the time to actually even notice whether you're full up or even what the food tastes like. And so suddenly, when we start to get menopausal symptoms, we're not going to connect that to how we were behaving 10 years ago and how we were eating and how our gut is now functioning or not functioning. And so what do? We go to the GP and go, oh, there's something wrong with me. I need some hormones. So, well, actually, that's not the first place to start, because, you know, hormone balance begins in the gut, and actually understanding how your body works by connecting back into it and trying to listen to what it's telling you, not dismissing it, is so important. Of course, it doesn't help that your GP often dismisses women's symptoms as being menopause when they're not, which is what happened to me when my Hashimoto's was misdiagnosed. And I was offered antidepressants. Thank you very much, but no thank you. But also it's like, oh, it's part of growing older. It's normal. Get on with it. No and no. But that's not the message that's being given loud and clear. The message is you need to fix yourself. Go do it by dieting or exercising more or losing weight. And then when we can't do it because there's other stuff going on emotionally, we then fall out with ourselves. And then we get into this horrible cycle. And because we think there's something wrong with us and maybe we're weak-willed or just not good enough at sticking to it, we kind of keep quiet, don't we? And we don't say, do you know what, I'm really struggling here. I can't follow this. Because
somehow,
it's
another source of shame, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's just
we're
another...
back to the shame. Yeah. And the guilt that I should be able to do this. I'm older now. I've got more experience. I should know how to stick to things. What is wrong with me? And nothing's wrong with you. You're not broken. You don't need fixing. What you do need is being heard, listened to, and to be able to understand what works for your body is not necessarily what works for somebody else's body. And that doesn't make it wrong and it doesn't make it right. It just makes it for you. And that's what we've got to learn. And it's giving ourselves space to do it. And this is the beauty, the gift, if you like, about midlife, is that hopefully we do have a little bit more time and space to actually start to connect back to us, because hopefully by that point, we feel more confident in who we are, but the people around us hopefully need us a little bit less than they did before. I know that's not always the case because other things come along and fill up that space. But if we can just maybe start to look at how I'm feeling now is related to what I did previously. And I'm not going to berate myself for that because I didn't know any different. So I did what I thought was the right thing at the time. But now let me look at how I can now change things so that I can start to feel better one step at a time. That's what it's about.
So I'm going to put my hand up now, and I'm going to say that my go-to stress relief is chocolate, gin, or white wine. And I am really conscious of that. You know, when I'm stressed, and as you said earlier, you know, for heaven's sake, for food and alcohol especially, we use it to celebrate, we use it to commiserate, we use it when we're up, when we're down. There's a pub in every village. You know, it's so endemic in our culture in the UK, isn't it?
Absolutely is. Yeah.
And I know through COVID, I've been drinking too much. You know, I can hand on heart, I know I've been doing that. And I'm trying to stop. But I often find that I don't have a stop switch. I'm better if I don't drink. But when I drink, I want to drink.
Yeah.
And also, as we get older, I mean, I know a lot of women, well, I know quite a few women who want to carry on drinking and take the HRT to manage the hormones instead of dealing with the alcohol, which is actually messing up the hormones and all the other issues as well. But as we get into midlife, we can't process alcohol the same way. You know, I don't bounce back the way I used to. You know, I feel shit. And so I find, one, I don't want to wear my wine, which is what the lovely Sam Palmer talks about. Don't wear your wine.
Love it. Love it.
It's good, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I don't have time for the recovery anymore.
No.
So I have to find something else. And, you know, chocolate is a bit more manageable. I don't binge on chocolate. I'll eat too much, a bit too much, but I'm more controlled with the chocolate.
Everybody does, though, comfort eat and stress eat at some point. They do. Oh, yeah.
So what can we do as we get to midlife? And, you know, it's all very well. I know all the tools. You know, I have the tapping app on my phone. You know I can sit there and tap, and the EFT, you know, technique. Or I can sit and I can meditate. Or I can get my journal out. But do I want to do that? No! I just want to have a glass of wine. Because I want to numb as well.
Yeah. Right.
And I'm conscious of that. And yet, I also know if we numb the bad, we numb the good as well. There's no sort of...
Yeah, it's a bit like antibiotics, isn't it? They get rid of the good and the bad bacteria. They don't discriminate.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Well, here's the thing. You've said some powerful stuff there that tells me that you actually fully understand why you are drinking. You said it's your go-to for stress. You've said that you're also aware now that you feel worse the next day than you used to, and you don't want to wear your wine, right? Which I absolutely love. When it comes to changing our behaviors, one of the questions that we like to ask, and it's very much a question that's asked around addiction, but is it actually just a habit that you've fallen into? That's the first question to ask, because for people in lockdown, the amount of people drinking has absolutely escalated, right? But it's not because they've suddenly become alcoholics. It's not that. It's because they have created a habit and they've gotten used to it. It's become comfortable. It's become automated because they've been able to perpetuate it. Now, if they'd been going out to work every morning, that habit would not have been allowed to become automatic because you would have broken it with you going out to work. So when we think of addiction, it's very much like a habit that you just repeating that's on automatic, right? Where does it cross the line? When you actually feel you cannot function normally without it. That's when it kind of crosses the line. And that was the case for me. But for the majority of people where it's a habit, you just have to say, okay, so what am I telling myself before I pour that first glass? What is the story in my head? Am I telling myself this is going to relax me and calm me down? Am I telling myself I deserve a treat? I've earned it, right? So know what is the story in your head that you're telling yourself. And then ask yourself, okay, do I agree with that? Is it actually true? Or is it a story that I'm just sticking to because it gives me an excuse and I feel better about doing it? There's no judgment on what the answer is, but get to know what it is you're saying and whether you actually think it's true or not. And then ask yourself the question that you've already kind of touched upon, but two questions. How do I want to feel when I go to bed tonight? Do I want to feel, oh, I've done it again? Or, oh, shoot, I know I'm going to feel rubbish in the morning. And then how do you want to feel when you wake up? Because you've got experience of what it feels like, you can play that movie forward. And so you've got that kind of feeling and sensation. You can go back to it in your head and you can connect to just exactly how bad it does feel. Do you want that in the morning? Will it stop you from pouring that glass? It might not. Okay. If it doesn't, you can then ask yourself, so what are the benefits of me doing this? If it's going to make me feel better and it's going to make me feel more calm and relaxed, should I be okay with it? Yeah, absolutely. If I'm going to be berating myself for having that first glass all night long, is it actually serving me? No. So it's about knowing what are you saying in your own head. One of the techniques that there's two things that I use a lot with my clients. And one is knowing why. So are you angry? So ask yourself, halt. Yeah, when it comes to food, you're going to say you're hungry. When it comes to alcohol, hunger's nothing to do with it. But are you angry, anxious, or avoiding something? And if you are, we need to be turning into those things, because when you drink your wine, those things that you are angry, anxious, or avoiding haven't gone anywhere. You've just kind of put the pause button on them. So lean into them, deal with them. Do I need to tell somebody they've hacked me off? And then I can let it go, right? What am I avoiding? Have I been avoiding it for a long time? Actually, does it even need to be on my agenda? Or can I let that go as well? So let's get honest about that. So that's the L. Am I lonely or bored? Those are two powerful things. So in lockdown, there's been a heck of a lot of that. Massive, right? So it's understandable that you want to turn to something that's going to give you something to do and focus on. And it works because it does make us feel better biologically and chemically. It works. Because as I said earlier, we wouldn't do it if it didn't. And then you can say, well, hang on, am I actually tired? Am I tense? We talked about relaxing because people use alcohol a lot to relax. And am I telling myself I need a treat? Now, if it's those, if you're tired, have a nap, go to bed earlier, right? If you're tense, can you give yourself a little self-massage? Can you go have a bath and just chill out and relax? Can you go maybe lie down on your bed and listen to a meditation and allow yourself to de-stress? If you deserve a treat, go back to those first questions. How I'm going to feel tonight, how I'm going to feel in the morning. Is it actually a treat? Is there a different, better way, a more enjoyable way of treating myself? And there potentially is. There might not be. And this is where we've got to be careful that we don't go too OTT on rules and being strict. Because if you want that chocolate and it works and nothing else is going to hit the spot, have it. Because then you can go, yeah, great, now I feel better. End of story. And it's not beating ourselves up about it. The other thing that I ask people to do is to delay. Delay it for 20 minutes and see if you still want it. When we delay something, it's that delayed gratification that we're not great at these days because we want instant gratification now. But if you don't ban it, but you tell yourself you can have it, but wait for 20 minutes. Go and actually do something that is physical. And I'm doing this because you need something that you can actually do with your hands that will occupy your brain and your hands. Watching TV isn't it, right? Listening to music is not necessarily it, but something where you're tidying out a drawer or doing some DIY or something that is going to achieve something, you're going to get something at the end of it, but actually keeps you occupied mentally and physically for 20 minutes and set an alarm. When that alarm goes off, you can then decide, actually, do I still want it, or has my energy completely changed and the reason why I wanted it has completely dissipated? Maybe it has, maybe it hasn't. But at least then you're doing it coming from a place of a conscious choice, not from a place of feeling out of control. So that's what we call the 3Ds exercise. And the last one that I love, because it often works, is that if you want to numb or distract or just feel better, your body's natural feel-good endorphins can come into play really quickly. And I'm talking about physical movement, 10-second bursts of activity. So literally 10 jumping jacks, running up and down on the spot, right? If you've got a staircase at home, run up the stairs in twos and run back down in singles and do that 3 times. I can guarantee you will feel completely different. It takes less than a minute. And that's a go-to that's one of my favorite because you're not going to get your journal out and start going, ooh, what am I thinking, right? You want an instant hit. Right? Yes. And that's instant. Yeah, you do burpees, you can do press ups, you do whatever you want. If you've got a skipping rope, skip. If you've got a rebounder, rebound. Right? If you want to sing in a hairbrush and bop, dance like no one's watching, you will change how you feel. And you don't need to do it for long. And it will change your energy and it will give you that feel-good boost of natural endorphins, which is not the same boost that your brain gets when it gets lit up like a Christmas tree with sugar and with alcohol. It's still a boost, but not in the same way. So that's what I would suggest people can actually do. And try stuff. Don't go, oh, I tried that once, it didn't work. Well, try it a second time, or better still, try something else and then try something else. And give yourself permission to find out what actually works for you.
It's absolutely brilliant. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. And make it fun. It's fun.
Absolutely brilliant. So simple, but so effective. I can tell I will be using those techniques. And presumably we can apply those to food as well.
Absolutely. Yep. Food, alcohol, anything that you utilize. It could be shopping. You know, if you're somebody who sits of an evening and starts going on all the shopping sites, right? Or online gambling, bingo. I mean, there's adverts everywhere for bingo and stuff like that. They're all designed to do the same thing. They're all designed to hit that reward center in your brain. And we repeat them because they work. Right? And what we need to do is go, okay, so this is working and I'm getting what I want, but how do I feel afterwards? And if the behavior that you're doing is making you feel guilty or ashamed or embarrassed afterwards, then you have to say, is it serving me well? It's serving me instantaneously and it works, but is it actually serving me? And if the answer is no, do I deserve to look after myself a little bit better than that? Yeah. How can I do that in a way that's not hard, that's not time consuming, that doesn't take me a lot of mental effort? Something quick like burst exercises, or tidying out that drawer that you've been putting off. You're doing some filing or something like that, or painting a wall, moving furniture, anything like that will keep you occupied, and just, it's quick, it's easy, it's doable. That's what it's all about.
Wow, that's oh wow, it's brilliant. Absolutely, so powerful. And I just want to, I'm conscious of time because I know you've got to go, but I want to ask you quickly about the importance of balancing the blood sugar levels, because
Huge.
I'm always talking about that for hormonal balance in midlife and menopause, but it's also applicable to food addiction, isn't it?
It's applicable for everything, right? One of the most important thing that you can do from a health point of view is hydration, sleep, and blood sugar balance. If you get nothing else right, get them right, because your blood sugar balance basically dictates everything else that goes on in your body. And as we know, our brain runs on glucose. Glucose is sugar. So we need to make sure that we are keeping that sugar balance as it should be. And this is where people get so confused about how to do that, especially when we're talking about use intermittent fasting and do this and do that. And this is where tuning into your body's signals and actually testing is key for this. I say to most people, and funnily enough, I did a live on this last week, there's 3 things that every household should have and use, and that is a body temperature thermometer, a blood pressure machine, know your blood pressure and your heart rate, and a blood glucose monitor. Know what your blood sugar levels are doing and get to understand how your body works, because you can prevent yourself from going into metabolic syndrome, pre-diabetes, if you have a clue as to what is going on. And they are cheap and they are easy to use, and start to get an idea of how your body responds to certain foods. And I help people to actually do a very simple, you don't need anything special, you can do an simple at-home blood glucose test to work out how quickly does your body come down after a glucose spike. And that's going to give you a clue as to how well your body's managing your glucose. But yes, absolutely, it's huge in terms of hormone balance. It's also huge in terms of your neurotransmitters, your receptors. And when we're talking about hormones, we're not just talking about your estrogens, progesterones, and everything else. We're talking about all of the hormones that rule everything in your body, because all hormones are messengers, and we've got hormones for everything. And does it affect all of them? Yes, it does. So it's massive. Huge.
And am I right in thinking that if we can balance our blood sugar levels, then we don't have the same cravings where we're desperately needing some sugar or something, to put in our mouths? Usually,
yes. I'm not going to say balancing blood sugar levels will stop you from having cravings at all. But understanding what are the parameters and what are the foods that work best for your body, will you feel that you've got less cravings? Yes, but don't forget, blood glucose levels, blood sugar levels, is not just about food. They are affected massively by the thoughts we think in our head, i.e. stress. And they're also affected by inflammation. So it could well be that you are eating foods that are healthy, but if your body has a reaction to them and there's an inflammatory response, then there is going to be an effect on your blood glucose levels. So it's not just about food, it's about environmental stresses. What's your toxic overload like? What are you using on your skin? Because that could affect what's going on. It's also the people that are around you. When we're talking about environment, and who are you surrounding yourself with? What's the conversation? Are you feeling mainly negative or positive? Because that will affect your stress response. And remember, your stress response is happening all the time. It's not conscious. but it will affect your blood glucose. So having a way of giving yourself space and time every day to take 5 minutes to work on your breath and to allow yourself time and space to chew your food really slowly and well, so that your body can actually digest and utilize what's going in, so that we can keep those blood sugars better balanced. But yeah, it's massive, and it's not that hard to do once you understand what you're doing and what steps you can take to change it very simply. Huge.
So what should we do? How can we balance our blood sugar levels?
So eating at regular intervals is the first easiest thing to do. Okay, so if you can ideally get up at the same time, go to bed at the same time, works with your circadian rhythm, because your blood sugar levels work with your circadian rhythm. And when we can eat on a regular basis, ideally every 4 hours is what most people function best on. Now, there will be some people who have issues with blood glucose, and they know that they get really kind of shaky and jittery if they don't eat every couple of hours. And that's a clear sign that there's issues going on with how their body is functioning on a digestive level. But every 4 hours, regular intervals is what you are looking at, and not overloading, getting a balance of good fats and starchy carbohydrates and proteins, so that we've got all of those nutrients going in. We don't just want fats. We don't just want proteins. We don't just want carbs. We need the fiber. We need the protein to help us feel satisfied, but we need the good fats to help the hormones to work as they should. And we ideally need all of those in a meal or a snack, and it doesn't matter. It's not about the quantities. It's about the quality and the regularity of the feeds that you give your body. So just work on eating regularly, not irregularly. That's a really good first step.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Magnificent Midlife podcast. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe or follow, share it, and I'd love a 5-star review. It really helps other listeners find the podcast. You can find out more information about this episode in the show notes at magnificentmidlife.com. That's also where you can access one-to-one mentoring with me, my membership program, and other resources to help make your midlife magnificent. Make the most of your next chapter. Help me change the world, one magnificent midlife woman at a time.